All right, if you live in the state of Illinois, critical race theory is coming to a school near you. Now, of course, local universities are already inundated with the ideology, but the neo-Marxist ideals are now headed to the K-12 public school system. This means kids will be forced to think more about their identity and their education. It also, amazing, we talked about this last summer. Here we did a couple program specials on education. And we looked at what happened under the Obama administration where they began to radicalize public education and basically were teaching and training activists. Now, it was kind of done under the cover of darkness. It was kind of a byproduct. Now, it appears to be the focus. This is incredible. You need to know what is happening in public education. Here to tell us more about what's happening in Illinois and very soon in a classroom near you, Stanley Kurtz, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Stanley, welcome to the program.
Tony, thanks so much for having me.
I read your article, and by the way, I've got a link to this, folks, at tonyperkins.com where you can read it. Tell us what's happening in Illinois in the classrooms.
Well, Tony, everything you said is right. Literally and legally, Illinois is about to turn its entire K-12 system into a leftist indoctrination camp. And as you say, we know that the schools have been trending this way for some time. But now the state of Illinois has written education standards for K-12. And teachers either conform to these standards or they will lose their licenses. So this really forces direct political bias onto the schools. And let me tell you in more detail what I mean. These new standards force teachers to teach from a progressive perspective. This is literally written into the standards.
They use that language.
They use that language. A teacher will teach from a progressive perspective. They have to be willing to endorse the idea that America is a systemically racist country. Crucially for Christians, they have to be willing to affirm the gender identities of any of their students and to affirm the very idea that gender is complex and fluid, meaning there are many more than two gender identities. They have to be willing to lead their students in leftist political protests and lobbying. They are encouraged, not demanded, but it's encouraged that they consider grading their students not on their performance, on ordinary knowledge, but on their social justice activism and on their willingness to do what's called action civics, which is just another name for social justice activism. And if you don't do all of these things, then while it isn't mandated, the new standards make it very easy for any district that would want to force a teacher into therapy to help them eliminate their whiteness. And that's the gist of it. But that's not enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's your article's I think about 5 or 6 pages long, so it covers quite a bit of information. But I want to, for a moment, on this action civics. I mean, what happened to education where we're teaching reading and writing and arithmetic? Now we're teaching them how to be radical left activists. That's what we send our children to school and what we give our tax dollars over to.
That's right, Tony, and it's very important that your listeners understand that this action civics is something very new, because what is happening and what is going to happen increasingly under the Biden administration is that you're going to hear a lot of proposals at the state and federal level to encourage the teaching of civics. Now, when traditionalists or conservatives hear that kind of talk, their heart melts and they say, oh, yes, that's what we need, the three branches of government and federalism and the Constitution. By all means, increase requirements to teach civics. But what they don't realize is that what's actually going to be in those requirements are requirements for action civics, which means that students will be required to have projects, quote unquote, that involve protests and lobbying. And of course, 9 times out of 10 or more, it's for a leftist proposal. So conservatives are in danger of being fooled into supporting something that will move in exactly the opposite direction of what they want. So when you hear a proposal to increase civics, you better look into it more carefully.
So this Action Civics, as you said, it requires student engagement in protest or lobbying, and this is organized by the teachers. So the teachers have to lead the students in these efforts?
Well, supposedly, if you talk to a defender of this, they will say, no, the teacher's not leading the students. They just find out what the students want to do, and then they tell them how to do that. So they say, well, what issues do you really care about? And everyone raises their hand and says, oh, ecology. And then the discussion gets led in the direction maybe of the Green New Deal. And all of a sudden the whole class is signed up for protesting in favor of the Green New Deal, and the teacher said all I did was to help them to do what they believed in to begin with. But of course the teacher led them into it, and even if the students did favor that general direction, the job of a teacher is to help them learn both sides and to question their initial and relatively uninformed ideas, and not to lead them on demonstrations.
I kind of see this, bear with me in the analogy, but during the presidential campaign, Joe Biden started talking about, we need to codify Roe v. Wade into law. And people saying, well, we already have that. I mean, that's what the court decided. But it's an acknowledgement that it is not the law. It is simply what has been done through the heavy hand of the court. What they're doing here, the schools have been used to indoctrinate children for years, but this actually codifies it into policy and the governance of these schools, and this will be what education is going forward.
Well, you're absolutely right, Tony. It's a great analogy, and the analogy works very well for the following reasons. You might say to yourself, well, why do they need to codify this kind of left-wing education when they're doing it anyway? But the point is, there are some conservative states and conservative school districts where they're not doing it this way. So by codifying it in law, what you're really doing is crushing any resistance on the part of conservatives who don't want to teach in this leftist way. Similarly, if they codify Roe v. Wade, then they're going to prevent states that don't want to go in that direction from breaking away from that. So it actually is very meaningful to codify it legally, even if the general trend is already in that direction.
All right, Stanley Kurtz, I know you didn't write this article just to get my blood pressure up and to sound the alarm, but there's a reason to sound the alarm, that it is early enough people can take action to expose this and to stop it. What can parents and others that are concerned about what is happening in the classrooms of America do?
Well, the first thing is, as far as Illinois in particular goes, if you live in Illinois, well, the state school board has approved this, but it has to be finally approved by a committee of the General Assembly of the state legislature, and that approval is scheduled for February 16th. If you go to the article that I wrote and that you've put up on your website, you'll see a link there that takes you someplace that shows you how to contact people in the legislature. And you might want to, in addition to contacting that committee, if you're in Illinois, you should probably contact your own state representative. Nationally speaking, Tony, this battle is going to keep playing out. By the way, I'll be writing more about it. There are groups that are planning right now, within the next month or 6 weeks, to make proposals for civics laws in the state and nationally. And keep an eye out for that. If they want, they can follow my writing at National Review online, and I'll try to show people what the bogus civics proposals are. And I think you might see in the coming months some proposals bubbling up in the states to try to stop this kind of politicization. And if and when that happens, I'll be touting it, and people can support that. But this really is a cutting-edge issue. This really is a moment when we're seeing critical race theory and this kind of radical neo-Marxist stuff being pushed by the left, and the Democrats have come in. So this is really something that's about to happen, and our pushback against it is in process. So people need to just follow this issue and be aware of the fact. Don't just let your heart melt with joy when you hear the word civics. Your antenna should go up, and you should be very careful.
All right, Stanley Kurtz, we will be staying in touch with you as you get more information. We'll have you back on to talk about it. Meantime, your article is at tonyperkins.com. And if you live in Illinois in particular, folks, I encourage you to go to the website and get Stanley's article. Stanley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.